Thanks for joining us. I will give an update about Liberty Counsel and the work that we've been doing. I think of the words of Patrick Henry, who said, "I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty." Patrick Henry uttered these words. He set out a rallying cry for the course of freedom that really defined what this country is all about. He understood that freedom comes with a cost. And the price of freedom, really the cost of freedom, has always been vigilance, standing on guard and paying attention to what's going on. And vigilance meeting action has been Liberty Counsel's rallying cry for over 30 years. But no more in our lifetime than in the past year has liberty been so threatened in this country. No more in recent memory than right now have we really been put to the test. We've been put to the test to discern and to decide if we're willing to pay that price of freedom and continue on this course of liberty. As a point of introduction, Liberty Counsel is a nonprofit litigation firm. We work in the legal sphere, restoring the culture, and we do so by advancing religious liberty, the sanctity of life, and the family. Last year I stood here on this stage and spoke about the lockdowns. We were just a few months into the lockdowns that began in February and March of last year. And these lockdowns, as you well know, were responsible for the economic blight that hit the country. But not only that, for the first time in American history, you saw a systemic, coordinated, intentional targeting of the church, an attempt to shut down and close the doors of the church. Last year at this time when I had just spoken to you, we had just concluded our representation of Pastor Rodney Howard Brown. You remember this pastor, he was arrested in Tampa Bay. He held service like he did every other Sunday on the last Sunday of March. But on that following Monday, while there was a press conference going on at the sheriff's office, he had helicopters flying over his house, and policemen came to his house. They handcuffed him. They put him in the back of a squad car. They took him to jail. They booked him. They put his mugshot on news all over the world. He had all manner of death threats and bomb threats against him. You remember this pastor well, and if it wasn't for our intervention, followed by the swift action of Governor DeSantis down in Florida, who, in response to our advocacy, then declared churches in Florida being essential and places of worship being essential, freeing up churches in the state. If it wasn't for our advocacy then, the legal outlook in terms of churches across the country would have been very different. It was a swift victory that we had that weekend, getting the pastor out of jail and ultimately getting the governor of Florida and the governor of Texas to treat churches as essential. It was a swift victory, but that was just the start, right? We just began the work for over 2,000 churches that we had to help over the past year in over 44 states. I remember being up several days, all of our attorneys working round the clock into the night, fielding calls from pastors, responding to their emails, talking to the prosecutors, talking to sheriffs, seeing how far the enforcement would go. These are churches in America, churches that you and I attend. Over 100 million Americans attend churches. At 11 o'clock every hour, you know where to find the American. They would be in church, but for the first time in history, they were shut down, threatened with being closed down. It was simple for these churches. All they wanted to do was worship God as is dictated to them in Scripture. All they wanted to do is exercise their constitutional right as it's protected. So these 2,000 churches would not shut their doors, and they sought our legal help to do so. And I would say to them over the phone, I would tell them about Daniel, how Daniel would never give up his obligation to God, how he would render to God worship in boldness, despite what the king's decree said. And I would tell these folks to open your windows, continue just as Daniel did, pray towards Jerusalem. And I could hear the confidence rising in the voices of these pastors as we stood alongside them. These churches, these 2,000 churches, the majority of them didn't make the headlines, but they remained as the moral force behind retaining the spirit of liberty throughout these lockdowns. There are a few churches that we represented that names did make the headlines, and I'll talk to you about them. They're of note because their profiles of courage were the actual lawsuits that we've brought. And their lawsuits have set out a course for this nation regarding pushing back against these lockdowns and the mandates. And their work and their diligence will echo on into the future. I think first of Lighthouse Church in Virginia. This is Pastor Ken Wilson and the members of Lighthouse Fellowship Church. Well, he held church on Palm Sunday, like is always done, but he was cited, he was charged. Mind you, the church service only had 16 folks, and they were in an auditorium that was rated to be able to hold 293 folks. Much like the size of this, there were only 16 folks. But they charged him, claiming that he was violating the governor's order and having received a penalty of up to a year in jail for that violation. They said, you violated the governor's order, you're in jail for a year. Yet all around him, all around the physical church, were commercial establishments that were having more than 16 folks filled with people. You had the governor that cited him marching arm in arm with Black Lives Matter protesters, hundreds of thousands in Virginia that very day. And so the case was so obvious. It was so obvious that they were being antagonistic against the Christian faith. But the case was also so good on the merits that Trump's Department of Justice filed a brief in favor of us. Even the vice president at the time, Mike Pence, commented on this particular case, saying that it was beyond the pale. And so this case is still working its way up. And if you hold on a second, I'll tell you what's awaiting its decision as it works its way up. I also think of Calvary Chapel in Bangor, Maine, right next door. This is a church that has a biblically based counseling program. It has a ministry that helps men and women who are trying to escape drugs and alcohol. You know, they're addicted to other life-controlling issues, and this church has a year-long program to help them overcome this. They're literally being the hands and feet of God, going into the community and helping these folks. They use counseling to help them. They even provide a shelter for these individuals, a temporary stay where these folks can come and get help. Well, the governor right next door to us, who still has some of the harshest restrictions in the country, targeted this church. And we fought all the way up to the Supreme Court for this church in Maine. Earlier this month, I was able to walk over and deliver our petitions to the court. This church is significant for New Hampshire, where we are, also for Massachusetts, because it's a First Circuit case, and so it would have implications on what happens in the future here. And if you hold on a second, I'll let you know exactly what's awaiting them at the Supreme Court. I think finally of the Romanian church. This is a church in Illinois, such a great church whose members of this church are actually made up by Romanian immigrants. These are individuals who have fled communist Romania. They have found a home in America where they know they can live freely, they can live and have the economic securities of a free market. They can also fulfill their spiritual necessities of open and free worship. That's why they came to America. They know firsthand in Romania what happens when a government starts to target your churches and starts to target your business. And they know exactly what the language is. They heard that it was for your good that we're closing down your churches and your businesses. But they could see down the road, and they know the inevitable communism and the socialism that follows government targeting churches and business. That's the very reason why these Romanians came to the United States. They're in Illinois, they're in Chicago, and the mayor there, Lightfoot, and the governor Pritzker in Illinois targeted this Romanian church. They harassed them and they spread libel and slander about that church to the neighborhood. They literally had flyers and signs around the neighborhood blaming the church, saying that the church's decision to continue to meet is going to impact the community around them such that we have to block off parking for all around the church within a 9-block radius. They had parking restrictions, and then they put up a flyer telling the residents that's because of what that church is doing. Literally libel and slander to the neighborhood. They also sent a letter, which is the worst kind of letter that I've ever seen written to a church. This letter threatened summary abatement. Summary abatement. And it's a seldom used legal category that's placed on a building. It's hardly ever used. It says that because the activity that's going on inside of this building is so dangerous, because the threat to the community of what's going on inside of this building is so dangerous, that the government is going to come in and destroy the building, literally level it brick by brick. Summary abatement is only reserved for the worst kind of things occurring in a building. If there's a nuclear spill in the building, or if there's uncontrolled asbestos and they realize that it's such a threat to the community, they will literally level the building brick by brick. Well, this is the letter that a government sent to a church saying that you worshiping is so dangerous that the city is literally going to come in and destroy it. Well, we fought, of course, hard against it, and we won a victory against this governor, against the mayor, where he basically throws his hands up and apologized what was going on. But the incredible irony that occurred, and it's only God's providence to flip this thing on its head. Because of the attention that the church got, there was such an outpouring of support for this church that not only was this building not destroyed, but they were able to have a multi-million-dollar restoration to the building. They had a full remodel to the building, to a state-of-the-art auditorium that rivals any of the edifices in that city. It's such a beautiful facility that they have now. What the government and what the governor meant for evil, trying to destroy this building, God turned it on its head and has seen it for good. Amen. Just as a moment of reflection, how true is that for you and I? What God can do in our lives. Amen. We were broken vessels. We were lost, condemned in our sin, with no seeming use to the outside world, right? The devil himself would pronounce summary abatement against you and I. Everything in our flesh was only worthy of destruction. But God placed His Spirit within us. Worship flows from us. And not only are we no longer condemned, but He birthed in us a restoration, a full renovation, a creation now fitting to serve Him and change the lives, impact the society around us, proclaiming the good news of Jesus Christ. What the world sees as evil and only good for destruction, God flips it on its head and sees it for good. Well, this case is still working its way up, and if you hang on a minute, I'll let you know what's waiting for it at the Supreme Court. Think of California, and this is the big one. This is what's awaiting these cases at the Supreme Court. Our litigation continued particularly intensely in California. California had some of the worst restrictions in the country and the longest lasting restrictions in the country. Since March of 2020, all the way till February 6th, of 2021, there was a complete ban on worship, a no worship ban across the entire state of California. You couldn't even worship in your own home, have a private Bible study in your own home with people that were outside of your home. There was a total ban on worship. Well, our pastor there, Pastor Sherry On, received a letter from the city of Pasadena, from the county there. It was a criminal prosecutor threatening him. And he sent this letter to the pastor and his staff. He said, this is the letter that the pastor receives from the government. It said, "This is to remind you that violations of these orders are criminal in nature. Each day," the letter said that each day that the church had a service was a separate violation that carried with it a punishment of up to 1 year in jail and a fine for violation. The letter continues to say, "Any violations in future will subject your church owners, the administrators, the operators, the staff, and the parishioners to the above-mentioned criminal penalties, as well as the potential closure of your church. Each one of this is punishable by up to a year in jail." That's literally what they threatened, that anyone walking into that building, every time you walked into worship, you would tack on an extra year of jail. This is what California was doing. And then they levied fines against churches in California that marshaled up to $3 million. And you know it. You've seen the pictures yourself. While there was a total worship ban in California, here there are hundreds of thousands of people in LA marching arm in arm across the street. You had the governor there out in public. Hollywood was never shut down. They were still able to film movies and have their large studios contain unlimited amounts of people while these churches are being shut down, threatened with jail time for each parishioner that walks in. Well, we weren't going to allow that to happen. We went to the Supreme Court twice last year, and in December, they sent us back to the lower court where we had lost in front of an Obama-appointed judge. It kicked us up again, and so we were at the Court of Appeals of the Ninth Circuit. We lost in the 2-1 decision, which we appealed, and that got sent right back up to the Supreme Court. And at the Supreme Court, this is where this case and all the other churches and cases that I mentioned will meet their inevitable end, where just a few weeks ago, because of the arguments and the persistence and the diligence that we had, we now have a court order, and it's a statewide order, a permanent injunction against all restrictions on houses of worship. It was an incredible victory. Such an incredible victory that it required the state of California to pay $1.35 million in attorney's fees and costs. $1.35 million. And we also continued fighting. We won a second injunction, and this one was not just temporary, it was a permanent injunction, which means we never have to go down this road again. They can never discriminate against churches and places of worship again. And if they were to do that, each violation, they'll be held in contempt of court. The other incredible win. The other cases that I mentioned that are working their way up to the court, because of this decision, they will have that same end. They will receive permanent injunctions. They will receive attorney's costs as well. Yes. And so we're nice, right? Just to be mindful of the feelings of the individuals in California. They're all environmentalists, right? And so they're worried about their green. And so here's a Green New Deal for California. You will pay green money, cash, every time you violate the church's constitutional rights to meet. That's a Green New Deal. Talk about how God flips this thing on its head. When I say God turns these things on its head and what they meant for evil, God meant for good, that $1.3 million is paid to our firm, right? It's attorney's fees, and we got the check this very last Thursday. We're going to take that money and use it to pay off a building that we have in Washington, D.C. And this is a building where my office is. It's right behind the Supreme Court. In addition to my office being there, that office and that building houses Bible studies every week for members of Congress and their staff right there on Capitol Hill. That office in that building has a Bible reading marathon, which is a full week of 24 hours round the clock of individuals reading scripture in a number of different languages. Members of Congress and elected officials come out and they read from that building. That occurs in that building, and California is now there to help pay off our mortgage with the money that we want. The money that they owed us is now going off to pay that building. We also have a live nativity that's out of that building. And for decades, and even last year, we consistently fight in courthouses and in state capitals to have a nativity. You know, the picture of Jesus being born. Sometimes it's outlawed in front of state houses and courthouses, and so we fought for that. Every year out of that very building that California is now paying for, we host a live nativity. It's a live nativity that has camels and sheep. It has actors playing the parts of Mary and Joseph. There's a baby there, a real live baby playing the part of Jesus. And every December, we march that from that ministry center in front of the Supreme Court, and we dramatize the nativity. What California intended as evil in fining churches millions of dollars, they will now use that money to pay to promote ministries like that in front of the Supreme Court. I've said it before, I'll say it again, what they intended for evil, God has intended for good. So we continue to fight. You ask, why do we fight so hard for religious liberty? Why do we fight so hard for the church and for the Constitution? Why are we so invested in the First Amendment that we hold dear to us? Well, we do that because we understand that the church is the one mouthpiece that God has. It's the one vessel that God uses to share his truth to the rest of the world. Throughout history, the Christian church has always been there. They've always been the last and the best resistance to any ungodly governmental authority. That's because there's no authority within the church higher than Scripture. And so when pastors speak directly to their congregants, they bypass any governmental control. They place the authority of God over any government. And that's been true across the world. It's been true here in America, where the Christian church, as you well know, has been the last bastion of true freedom in our nation. Without the voice of Christians, without the voice of the church in America, we'd be running headlong into being an anti-God, anti-family, anti-life Marxist society. And so our fight for the church, our fight for religious freedom, is because we know that the very basis of all of our freedoms echoes from what is being done inside of the church. That's why we'll never give up in our fight for churches. Amen. So here's a quick recap on the churches. Florida was freed on April 1st. Their church ban was dropped as a result of our defense of Rodney Howard Brown. Kentucky was freed on May 2nd, where we won back-to-back rulings granting injunctions against Governor Beshear. Illinois was freed on May 28th. That all-church ban was dropped as a result of that Romanian church in Chicago. Colorado was freed on December 7th. Their all-church ban was dropped as a result of our defense of Andrew Womack. California was free this year in February around 1 a.m. in the morning on Saturday, where the Supreme Court issued an injunction against California's no worship ban. We won't stop. We're going to keep going and not relent. We'll do that because we understand that the price of freedom is too much. It costs too much. It has cost too much. And despite it requiring our vigilance and our action, we are going to continue doing that. We'll withstand what the government is trying to do when it shuts down our churches. We'll withstand what the left is trying to do in their constant assault against our religion, their constant assault against our beliefs. We'll even withstand the naysayers, those that were within the church that said, let up in this fight, don't worry. We only have 15 days and they'll let us go back to church. They'll reopen our sanctuaries. We'll fight back even against that. We'll withstand the temptation to be apathetic. We'll withstand the fear of being hated. Because our pastors have shown that they don't worry what others may say. Our church has shown that they will not worry what others may say. And I know that I care not about what course others may take. As for me, as for these churches, as for these pastors, give me liberty. Amen. Our fight continues on that front. Our fight also continues on the abortion front. There are other areas where our legal advocacy and our intervention reaches concerning the pro-life issue. In this upcoming year, we're going to support and defend the Mississippi law that has found its way to the Supreme Court. It's a critical law that's going to be heard in front of the Supreme Court next year. This is a law that passed where Mississippi prohibited abortions after 15 weeks. This law was blocked by a federal judge after it was passed. The Fifth Circuit there upheld the decision, and they did so because of the specter of Roe v. Wade. Well, the Supreme Court is set to take up this case. It's a positive step towards finally having an answer to Roe v. Wade, finally overturning this tragic decision that was made 48 years ago. This is a very real shot at it. It's a chance to overturn this abortion precedent, this culture of death that Roe v. Wade has brought about. Amen. And we all know that abortion takes away innocent human life. And so Mississippi enacted this law to stop it. And so we'll help support Mississippi in their effort in front of the Supreme Court as we file briefs in support of their case. Another area where we'll be fighting, and we've been winning and we'll be continuing to win, is fighting against the LGBT agenda. So the LGBT agenda has targeted counseling, and they have these counseling bans all across the country. These are bans that basically condemn minors and force them to struggle with their unwanted sexual attraction or their unwanted gender identity. And we know that God is powerful to break anyone free of that sin. But he's also equipped us with the tools through the church and through counseling to help repair the past that individuals have had so that they can overcome this sin. And you know folks that have struggled with sexual sin their entire life, whether it's addiction to pornography, whether it's adultery, whether it's promiscuous sex that they've started at an early age, whether it's homosexuality or transgender identity. God is able to free them from sins. He's able to free anyone from their sins. And there's so many examples of men and women that I know personally that were headlong into the homosexual lifestyle, running towards something that was against God's will for their life. But they've been forgiven and they've changed. And many of them have attributed that life-saving change to the counseling that they've received from these counselors. Yes. But in Massachusetts and in 20 other states, that very counseling, that life-saving counseling, is considered illegal. They're not able to receive that counseling. So we've been fighting in this space, and we've been successful in striking down 2 laws at the 11th Circuit, ultimately ruling, the 11th Circuit did, that counseling bans like this violate the First Amendment. We're currently fighting a case in Maryland, and we're going to take this case, Lord willing, up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has already ruled that professional speech of this kind is a protected right. Any restriction on that speech, that counseling, is unconstitutional. And so it's just a matter of time until this case reaches the court and they rule in our favor in this regard. These laws are being federalized, and these laws are being codified even in the Equality Act that we briefly mentioned yesterday. And so our fight against the LGBT agenda is not only a legal fight, but it's also a legislative fight. Our fight also continues in Congress and on Capitol Hill. I serve in the DC office and lead the public policy and the governmental affairs to Capitol Hill. We mentioned yesterday our fight against H.R. 1, our fight for election integrity. But in this past year, we've championed the cause of liberty in Capitol Hill. We've fought hard to push back against laws. We've even fought back in the big tech space. We fought back against Facebook, winning victories for organizations that have been censored in Facebook. On Capitol Hill, we've delivered over 150,000 faxes and petitions. We're able to consistently every day message to millions of people who count on us to provide them with accurate information, up-to-date information of what's going on Capitol Hill. And we also take steps to make sure your voices are heard on Capitol Hill. Our website provides simple steps on how you can join our petitions and join our efforts to make your voice known on Capitol Hill. We consider you all our constituents. We echo your sentiments of freedom as we march through the halls of Congress. We also, and this is what Hal mentioned yesterday, we represent you legally. We represent Camp Constitution in front of the First Circuit and hopefully in front of the Supreme Court, defending your ability to fly the Christian flag. About a month ago, as Hal mentioned, we finished our brief and our filing. It was over 320 pages that we neatly packaged, and I personally had the privilege to walk it to the court and deliver it on behalf of Camp Constitution. This is a petition to the United States Supreme Court in your defense of your rights to free speech, and we're praying that the court will take up this case and forever right this wrong in the city of Boston so that the Christian flag can fly over it. Amen. Lastly, and I'll mention quickly, with regard to COVID, our work continues against the unlawful tyranny that comes about from these COVID orders. We've exposed the fact in the vaccine space that all the leading vaccines contain aborted fetal tissue, either in the testing or the production of vaccines. And you remember last year was very early on. We even had to shut off the cameras because we got a tip that the 3 leading vaccines that government is literally paying money towards, they knew that it contained either aborted fetal tissue or aborted testing. And so we told you that last year, and now we've been fighting against individuals being forced to take the vaccines. You know, our fight is for individuals in hospital settings. Many of the cases that we've taken are folks in hospital settings or university students that are forced to take the vaccines to work at the hospital or attend universities. We're still getting around-the-clock calls from individuals that are being threatened with termination, threatened with expulsion if they don't take this vaccine. We've developed a strong legal strategy to help you push back against this. We're able to arm you with the language that you need to properly assert your exemptions, stating based on your religious claim, stating that based on your convictions that you have a moral opposition to the vaccine that ought to be recognized by law. So we can arm you legally on how to fight against that. You know full well that this vaccine is simply on a trial basis, right? It does not even have approval by the FDA. Only the big 3 that most folks are running after, they have emergency use designation, not even approved by the FDA. And so no employer and no hospital should force an individual against their will to take the vaccines in order to retain employment or attend their school. And those aren't just loose words, right? We have the legal authority to give you the backing so that you can confidently make that determination as well and act on it. You know, no more time in recent history than right now have we been put to the test to discern and to decide if we are willing to pay the price of freedom and continue on this course of liberty. You know, the threat to freedom, as you well know, it's a calculated threat, it's a persistent threat, it's a relentless threat. But so are we. So are all of you. We know that freedom comes with a cost. We know the price of freedom still is and will always be eternal vigilance, looking out for what's coming down the road. And mind you, I may agree with what the Supreme Court has done in the past few years, and I certainly agree with what they've done with our cases and their recent decisions. But still, the Supreme Court is a terrible backstop if they're the entity that we are hoping to secure our rights. That responsibility ultimately lies with you. And so if that means activate for your rights, activate for your beliefs, then activate. If it means to advocate for your truth, then advocate for truth. If it means to vote in a certain way, then vote that way. If it means to get familiar with the names of your legislatures, to get familiar with the name of your congressman and your governor, and let them know that you will not stand for one more inch of your freedom taken away, then make that stand. Advocate, advocate, demonstrate until the truth of your convictions and the reverberations of your faith shake the very walls of the government houses. Let them know that you are there and you will not back down. Stand up and say no when they seek to place any law that challenges your rights to freedom. Turn your convictions and your faith, turn that into vigilance, and then turn your vigilance into action. Yes. And with God's help, with Liberty Counsel on your side, caring not what course others may say that as for you, as for me, give me liberty.